Why did no one at that prestigious country club speak up when something so blatantly unjust unfolded before their eyes? When a modest appearance becomes a perceived fault, who is truly at fault? Victoria Sterling stepped out of a gleaming Tesla, dressed in a neatly tailored outfit devoid of any recognizable branding, walking with the composed ease of someone fully aware of her own worth. Then came Richard Whitmore, a silver-haired gentleman in a perfectly polished suit, every movement polished with the confidence of a man long accustomed to being served. Hurling his BMW keys in her direction as if issuing a command to a low-level staffer, his voice rang out clearly, each word crisp with authority and almost defiant in tone. "Don't let it get scratched. I'll be inspecting every detail after it's washed." All around them, no one reacted. Those standing nearby merely turned their heads slightly. Half-finished conversations hung in the air, frozen mid-thought, as silent gazes shifted toward the scene like spectators observing something all too familiar. No one said a word because here, small injustices like this one often pass unnoticed, leaving behind no trace. Victoria bent down and calmly picked up the keys as if they weighed nothing, then rose to meet Richard's gaze with quiet steadiness. And within minutes, every witness present would come to see an introduction unlike anything they could have imagined. Emily Chen bursts through the clubhouse's mahogany double doors with the urgency of someone who can sense disaster approaching, but cannot yet see its shape. Her crisp white uniform and polished name tag identify her as junior staff, but her flushed face and rapid breathing suggest she understands the gravity of what she's witnessing better than anyone else present. "Excuse me, Mr. Whitmore," she calls out, her voice carrying the careful politeness of someone who has learned to navigate the treacherous waters of club hierarchy. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding." "She's not one of our valet staff?" Richard doesn't even turn to acknowledge her presence, his attention fixed on Victoria with the intensity of a predator asserting dominance over territory. His manicured fingers drum impatiently against his leather briefcase as he surveys his presumed subordinate with undisguised satisfaction. "Of course she's staff," he replies with the casual dismissiveness of someone who has never had his assumptions challenged. "Just look at her." The words carry decades of entitlement, each syllable weighted with presumptions about place and propriety. "You girls in the front office need to do a better job controlling who gets access to the VIP areas. We can't have random people wandering around where they don't belong." Victoria remains motionless, the BMW keys resting in her palm like a small silver promise of chaos to come. She observes the unfolding scene with the detached fascination of an anthropologist studying tribal behavior, her expression revealing nothing of the storm brewing beneath her calm exterior. The morning membership is beginning to take notice now, their conversations trailing off as they become aware of the developing drama. A cluster of middle-aged women in tennis whites pause their discussion of weekend plans, their perfectly coiffed heads turning in unison toward the commotion. Two men in golf attire interrupt their review of business deals to watch what promises to be an entertaining morning spectacle. "This is a high-class establishment," Richard continues, his voice rising with the confidence of someone performing for an appreciative audience. "We maintain certain standards here, certain expectations about who belongs and who doesn't. People don't just walk into Meadowbrook like they own the place." His words carry the weight of tradition and the certainty of someone who has never questioned his right to determine others' worthiness. The watching crowd murmurs approval, their nods and quiet comments creating a chorus of agreement that feeds Richard's sense of righteous authority. Emily makes another desperate attempt to intervene, her voice smaller now, but still persistent. "Mr. Whitmore, I really think there's been a mistake here. If you would just let me explain." "There's no mistake." Richard cuts her off, with the sharp efficiency of someone accustomed to silencing opposition before it can gain momentum. "I've been a platinum member of this club for 15 years. I know every face that belongs here. And I certainly know who. He gestures broadly toward Victoria, as if her very presence validates his point. Look at her standing there with my keys. What more evidence do you need? Marcus Williams, the head of security, emerges from the main entrance with the measured pace of someone who has learned to assess situations before acting. His imposing frame and alert eyes mark him as a professional, but there's something else in his expression now. A flicker of recognition that he can't quite place. Like trying to remember a face from a half-forgotten dream. The morning sun climbs higher, transforming the parking area into a stage lit by natural spotlights filtering through the oak canopy. More club members drift out from the restaurant and pro shop, drawn by the magnetic pull of conflict and the promise of social drama worth discussing over lunch. Richard surveys his growing audience with evident satisfaction, feeding off their attention like a performer finding his rhythm before a receptive crowd. We simply cannot allow these people to think they can come and go as they please, he declares, his voice carrying across the parking area with practiced authority. What's next? Letting them actually use the golf course? Taking over the dining room? The rhetorical questions hang in the air like smoke signals, and several members of the crowd nod in agreement. A few others shift uncomfortably, but none dare voice disagreement with such a senior member in such a public forum. Victoria finally speaks, her voice quiet but carrying, with perfect clarity across the parking area. Would you like me to park your car for you, Mr. Whitmore? The question lands with unexpected force, its simple directness somehow shifting the entire dynamic of the confrontation. Richard pauses, momentarily thrown by what he interprets as appropriate submission from someone who has finally understood her place in the natural order. A smile spreads across his face, the satisfied expression of a man who believes he has successfully established proper boundaries through superior force of personality. Finally, he says, straightening his tie with a self-congratulatory gesture. Someone who understands how things work around here. Richard's satisfaction manifests in increasingly expansive gestures as he addresses his audience of fellow club members. You see how simple it is when people understand their proper role, he announces, his voice carrying the tone of someone delivering a valuable lesson. Clear communication and firm boundaries. That's all it takes. The crowd has grown to include a sophisticated cluster of women who emerged from their morning bridge game in the East Wing, their designer accessories catching the sunlight as they position themselves for optimal viewing of the unfolding drama. Their perfectly styled hair and understated jewelry mark them as the social arbiters of Meadowbrook, and their presence adds weight to whatever conclusion they draw from these events. Emily makes one more valiant attempt to restore sanity to the situation. Mr. Whitmore, please, I really think we should step inside and— That's quite enough from you, Richard snaps, his patience for contradiction clearly exhausted. The sharpness in his voice causes several nearby members to look up from their conversations with renewed interest. You're new here, so perhaps you don't fully understand the standards we maintain at Meadowbrook. This situation doesn't require your input. His dismissal carries the particular cruelty of someone who enjoys demonstrating power over those unable to retaliate. Emily's face flushes with embarrassment and frustration, but her junior position leaves her powerless to challenge a senior member's authority in front of witnesses. Marcus continues his measured approach across the parking area, his trained eyes taking in every detail of body language and positioning. Something about Victoria's posture, the way she holds herself with such complete stillness, triggers fragments of memory that refuse to coalesce into recognition. He has worked security for countless events, met hundreds of VIPs and dignitaries, and there's something maddeningly familiar about her bearing that goes beyond casual acquaintance. The morning breeze carries the scent of freshly cut grass and blooming jasmine from the landscaped gardens, creating an almost pastoral backdrop for the tension building in the parking area. Golf carts glide silently along distant paths, their occupants too far away to witness the drama unfolding near the clubhouse. Victoria studies the faces around her with the calculating precision of someone accustomed to reading rooms full of powerful people. She notes the mix of emotions playing across their features: embarrassment, curiosity, approval, and in a few cases, barely concealed discomfort with what they're witnessing. Several people have their phones out now, some openly recording what they assume will be an amusing anecdote to share at dinner parties. She notices this development with particular interest, her lips curving into the faintest suggestion of a smile that somehow makes the morning air feel electric with possibility. "All right," she says with carefully measured calm. "I'll park your car for you." The words carry an undertone that makes several people in the crowd shift uncomfortably, though none can articulate exactly why her acquiescence feels more threatening than defiant. There's something in her tone, a quality of controlled power that seems at odds with her supposed position, that creates ripples of unease among the more perceptive observers. Richard, however, remains oblivious to these subtle currents, interpreting her compliance as vindication of his authority. "Excellent decision," he replies with evident satisfaction. "And do be careful with the leather interior. It's genuine Italian craftsmanship, worth more than most people earn in several months." He turned to address his audience again, launching into a brief discourse about the importance of maintaining standards and the necessity of clear social boundaries. His voice carries the confidence of someone who believes he's conducting a master class in proper club management. Thompson, a distinguished gentleman with silver hair and kind eyes, watches the proceedings with growing discomfort. As a longtime member who has witnessed the evolution of social attitudes over decades, he recognizes something troubling in the dynamics playing out before him. His weathered hands grip his golf bag more tightly as he debates whether to intervene. Marcus has stopped walking and now stands about 20 feet away, his hand moving unconsciously toward the radio clipped to his belt. Every instinct developed over years of security work is telling him that something significant is about to happen, though he can't yet identify the source of his unease. Emily retreats toward the clubhouse entrance, clearly torn between her duty to prevent problems and her inability to effectively challenge a senior member without risking her employment. Her young face shows the frustration of someone who can see disaster approaching but lacks the authority to prevent it. The morning air carries the sound of lawn equipment working on distant fairways and the gentle splash of ornamental fountains, creating an almost surreal contrast to the human drama unfolding in the parking area. Victoria hefts the BMW keys in her hand, testing their weight like a craftsman examining tools before beginning important work. "You know," she says conversationally, her voice cutting through Richard's ongoing monologue, "I've always found it fascinating how people make assumptions about others based purely on appearance." The comment lands with unexpected weight, causing several members of the crowd to pause their whispered conversations and look more closely at the woman holding the keys. There's something in her tone, an educated precision and underlying authority, that doesn't quite match the role she's supposedly playing. Richard misses the philosophical undertone entirely, interpreting her observation as small talk from someone finally embracing her proper place in the social hierarchy. "Well, that's simply how the world works," he replies with casual dismissiveness. "People know their place, or they learn it quickly enough. Natural order, you might say." The crowd murmurs agreement, though some voices carry less conviction than others. A few members exchange glances that suggest they're beginning to sense something unusual about this seemingly routine interaction. Victoria nods thoughtfully, as if considering his words with genuine interest. "Natural order," she repeats softly. "What an interesting choice of words, Mr. Whitmore." Richard, emboldened by what he perceives as successful dominance and energized by his audience's attention, decides to drive his lesson home with the thoroughness of someone who mistakes public humiliation for effective leadership. The morning light catches the satisfied gleam in his eyes as he prepares to deliver what he clearly believes will be the defining moment of this educational experience. "Before you park my vehicle," he announces with deliberate loudness, ensuring every member of the growing crowd can hear his words, "I want you to clean my shoes. They became quite dirty walking across the grass from the parking area." The request detonates in the morning air like a verbal explosion, creating a silence so profound that even the distant sounds of the golf course seem to fade into nothing. The ornamental fountains continue their gentle splash, but the human world has suddenly stopped breathing. Richard extends one expensive Italian leather shoe toward Victoria, raising his foot slightly off the ground in a gesture that speaks to centuries of assumed superiority and entitlement. The leather gleams with the kind of polish that costs more per application than many people earn in a day, and his silk socks peek above the shoe's edge like small flags of privilege. Emily's gasp cuts through the silence like a knife blade. "Mr. Whitmore, that's completely inappropriate," she begins, her voice shaking with a mixture of shock and outrage that overrides her careful professional training. "You cannot ask someone to— Do you want to keep your job?" Richard asks with quiet menace, his eyes never leaving Victoria's face as he delivers the threat. "Then I suggest you learn when to speak and when to remain silent. This is not your concern." The words carry the weight of absolute authority backed by 15 years of membership and significant financial influence within the club's hierarchy. Emily's face goes pale as she realizes the impossible position she's been placed in. Watch someone be humiliated, or risk her own livelihood in a pointless gesture of defiance? Marcus has moved close enough now to intervene physically if necessary, but the shock of what he's witnessing has temporarily paralyzed his usual decisive instincts. His hand hovers over his radio as competing impulses war within him. The trained response to maintain order and prevent incidents, and a growing certainty that he's watching something that will have consequences far beyond this single morning. My team. The crowd has swelled to include nearly 30 people now, ranging from early morning golfers to late breakfast diners who have been drawn outside by word that something extraordinary is happening in the VIP parking area. Their faces show a mixture of emotions: fascination, discomfort, anticipation, and in some cases, barely concealed excitement at witnessing such a dramatic assertion of social hierarchy. Victoria looks at the offered shoe with the same calm attention she might give to an interesting piece of art in a museum. Her silence stretches long enough to make several people in the crowd shift nervously, though none can articulate exactly why her stillness feels more dangerous than any angry response might have been. "You want me to clean your shoes?" she asks finally, her voice carrying a dangerous undertone that several people in the crowd recognize instinctively, even if they cannot identify its source. "That's what people like you do," Richard replies with the casual brutality of someone who has never questioned his right to humiliate others for the entertainment of his peers. "It's honest work. Nothing shameful about knowing your place in the world." The crowd shifts with visible discomfort now. Thompson, the older gentleman with the kind eyes, takes a half step forward as if to object, but catches himself before speaking. The social dynamics of the club create an invisible pressure that keeps potential objectors silent, each waiting for someone else to take the risk of challenging such a prominent member in such a public forum. Several members of the bridge club exchange meaningful glances, their expressions suggesting they recognize that something has crossed a line from acceptable social correction into something darker and more troubling. But their perfectly manicured hands remain folded, their voices silent. Victoria can see at least 20 phones pointed in her direction now, some held openly and others partially concealed behind purses or golf bags. Among the faces in the crowd, she recognizes several prominent business leaders, socialites, and civic figures. People whose opinions carry weight far beyond the boundaries of Meadowbrook Country Club. "And if I refuse your request?" she asks, her voice maintaining its eerily calm quality, despite the enormity of the insult being offered. Richard's smile turns predatory, the expression of someone savoring a moment of absolute power over another human being. "Then I call the police and have you arrested for trespassing on private property. And I personally ensure that you never work at any respectable establishment in this city again." He pauses for effect, scanning the crowd to ensure they appreciate the completeness of his authority. "I have friends and business relationships throughout this community. One phone call from me can destroy someone like you, professionally and socially. Permanently." The threat hangs in the air like poison gas, and several people in the crowd look genuinely uncomfortable with the level of malice being displayed. But the social pressure to remain silent in the face of a senior member's actions proves stronger than their moral discomfort. Victoria bends down slowly, and for a breathless moment, everyone expects her to comply with the degrading demand. Instead, she reties her own shoelace with deliberate precision, then stands back up with fluid grace. When she speaks again, her voice carries a new quality, something that makes the morning air feel charged with electricity. "You know, Mr. Whitmore," she says conversationally, "I'm going to remember this moment for the rest of my life. Every single detail, every word you've spoken, every person who stood here and watched." The smile that plays across her lips causes several people in the crowd to step back unconsciously. There's something in that expression, a quiet confidence suggesting she knows something the rest of them don't, that transforms the entire dynamic of the confrontation in ways none of them yet understand. Richard, still oblivious to the subtle but seismic shift occurring around him, nods with evident satisfaction. "Excellent. Perhaps you'll learn something valuable about respect and understanding your proper place in society. Consider it a free education." The words hang in the morning air like the last notes of a song before the music changes completely, and Victoria's smile widens just enough to suggest that the real performance is about to begin. Victoria decides to transform Richard's attempted humiliation into an elaborate performance, playing the role of inexperienced valet with such exaggerated precision that it begins to feel more like theatrical mockery than genuine compliance. She approaches his BMW with the reverent caution of someone handling a priceless artifact, holding the keys as if they were crafted from the rarest metals. "Oh my goodness," she says with perfectly pitched anxiety, her voice carrying just far enough for the entire crowd to hear every carefully chosen word. "I've never been trusted with such an expensive automobile before. What if something terrible happens to it?" The question sends a visible tremor through Richard's composure. His face flushes red as he realizes he's created a situation where his prized possession might actually be at risk. "Then you'll pay for every penny of damage," he shouts, his voice cracking slightly with stress. "Everyone here is a witness to your responsibility." Victoria nods with exaggerated seriousness, as if she's carefully considering the financial implications of damaging a vehicle worth more than most people's annual salaries. She examines the keys with theatrical intensity, turning them over in her hands, like a jeweler appraising precious stones. "These keys must be worth a fortune themselves," she observes with innocent wonder. "The craftsmanship is extraordinary." She fumbles with the key fob, and it slips from her fingers with a metallic clatter that echoes across the parking area like a gunshot. "Careful!" Richard screams, lurching forward as if the fallen keys might spontaneously combust. "Those are precision German engineering. They cost more than you probably make in a month." The crowd has grown exponentially as word spreads through the clubhouse that something unprecedented is happening in the VIP parking area. Well-dressed members stream out from the restaurant, pro shop, and meeting rooms, drawn by the commotion like iron filings to a powerful magnet. The gathering now includes some of the most prominent figures in the city's business and social community. Victoria retrieves the keys with elaborate care, brushing imaginary dust from their surface before approaching the BMW's driver door. She opens it with what appears to be excessive force, creating a sharp sound that makes Richard wince, as if he's been physically struck. "I'm so sorry," she calls out with apparently genuine distress. "I'm not accustomed to such sophisticated mechanisms. Please forgive my clumsiness." "Gentle. For God's sake, be gentle." Richard is practically dancing with anxiety now, torn between his desire to maintain authority in front of the crowd and his terror for his vehicle's safety. "That's hand-stitched Italian leather. Each seat costs more than most cars." Victoria slides into the driver's seat and begins adjusting everything with deliberate, infuriating slowness. The mirrors require multiple small movements to achieve proper positioning. The seat adjustment produces a series of mechanical whirs as she moves it forward and backward repeatedly. The steering wheel telescopes in and out with mechanical precision that she seems to find fascinating. "This is incredibly complex," she marvels aloud. "So many sophisticated controls. I certainly don't want to damage anything through ignorance." Richard provides increasingly frantic commentary about proper care and handling procedures, his voice rising in pitch with each mechanical sound emanating from his beloved vehicle. Sweat begins to appear on his forehead despite the mild morning temperature. Emily reappears from the clubhouse, this time accompanied by Davidson, the club's general manager, whose face transforms from irritation to horror as he recognizes the woman behind the wheel of Richard's BMW. "Oh dear God," he whispers, his voice barely audible but somehow carrying to several nearby members. "Oh no, 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 no." Thompson, the distinguished older member, finally overcomes his social conditioning and steps forward with obvious concern. "Richard, perhaps we should reconsider this entire situation." "Stay out of this, Thompson," Richard snaps, his attention completely absorbed by protecting his car from what he perceives as inevitable damage by incompetent hands. "This is about principles, about maintaining the standards that make Meadowbrook what it is." Marcus catches Davidson's reaction and feels his own recognition finally clicking into place like tumblers falling in a complex lock. His eyes widen as fragmented memories suddenly coalesce into shocking clarity, and he immediately reaches for his radio, not to summon assistance for removing Victoria, but to prepare for what he now realizes will be a seismic shift in the club's power dynamics. Victoria continues her elaborate charade, starting the BMW's engine and revving it slightly, producing a powerful rumble that makes Richard leap forward as if the vehicle might explode. She then begins the most torturous parking maneuver in automotive history, pulling forward a few feet, stopping, backing up slightly, stopping again, adjusting her position with microscopic precision. "I want to make absolutely certain I don't scratch any of the other magnificent vehicles," she explains with apparent earnestness. The responsibility is quite overwhelming. Richard's anxiety reaches fever pitch as he watches his prized possession being maneuvered by someone he's convinced possesses no driving skills whatsoever. "Just park it anywhere," he finally explodes, his composure completely shattered. "I'll move it myself later." But Victoria isn't finished with her performance. She continues the elaborate parking dance, each movement calculated to maximize Richard's stress while appearing to demonstrate excessive caution and concern for his property. "Are you certain this is the optimal location?" she asks through the open window. "I wouldn't want to impede traffic flow or create any inconvenience for other members." The question is posed with such apparently genuine concern that several people in the crowd begin to sense that something deeper is happening here. The way she speaks, with perfect grammar, sophisticated vocabulary, and an underlying authority that seems to emerge from nowhere, makes them look at her more closely. Richard, too focused on his car to notice the shifting mood around him, makes his final critical mistake. Just do what you're told, he shouts with undisguised desperation. It's not that complicated. Even someone like you should be able to manage basic parking. Victoria nods thoughtfully, executes a perfect parking maneuver with sudden, graceful precision, and steps out of the vehicle with a fluidity that seems to belong to an entirely different person than the fumbling valet of moments before. Thank you for that educational experience, Mr. Whitmore, she says, her voice now carrying a new quality that makes everyone within earshot pay attention with sudden intensity. Now, I believe it's time for some proper introductions. Davidson reaches Victoria's position just as she's extending Richard's BMW keys toward him with a gesture that somehow manages to be both gracious and ominous. The club manager's face has progressed from white to an alarming shade of gray, and his hands tremble visibly as he approaches what he now recognizes as a situation of potentially catastrophic proportions for his career and the club's reputation. Mr. Whitmore, Davidson says, his voice tight with barely controlled panic and professional desperation. I need to ask you something very important. Do you have any idea who this woman actually is? Richard, still focused on inspecting his BMW for potential damage, waves dismissively without looking up from his examination of the paint finish. I don't care if she's the Queen of England, he replies with aggressive irritation. She's either a valet who needs better training or a trespasser who needs to be removed. Either way, she doesn't belong in the VIP section. Davidson swallows hard, his Adam's apple bobbing like a cork in rough water as he prepares to deliver information that will fundamentally alter the trajectory of Richard's morning, and possibly his entire social standing within the community. Mr. Whitmore, he begins again, his voice now carrying the solemnity of someone delivering news of a death in the family. This is Victoria Sterling, Chief Executive Officer and majority shareholder of Sterling Golf Enterprises, the corporation that owns and operates Meadowbrook Country Club, along with 23 other premier golf facilities across the United States. The words detonate in the morning air with the force of a controlled explosion. Conversations stop mid-syllable throughout the crowd. Phones that had been recording for entertainment suddenly feel heavy with the weight of documenting something that will have far-reaching consequences. Richard freezes with his hand still pressed against the BMW's hood, his face cycling through a rapid succession of emotions: confusion, disbelief, and dawning horror. That's impossible, he whispers, his voice barely audible above the gentle splash of nearby fountains. Then, louder, with desperate denial, that's completely impossible. She's obviously just a... He stops himself before completing the sentence, suddenly aware that every word he speaks is being captured by multiple recording devices. Victoria reaches into her pocket with deliberate ceremony and produces a black card that seems to absorb light rather than reflect it. The card's matte finish speaks of exclusivity that transcends mere wealth, entering the realm of true power. Founders Circle membership, she explains with quiet authority, holding the card so the crowd can see its distinctive design. Reserved exclusively for owners and principal shareholders of Sterling Golf Properties. I believe your membership level is platinum, Mr. Whitmore, which means you pay my company approximately $3,000 per month for the privilege of playing golf here. The silence that follows her words stretches so long that the ambient sounds of the golf course, birds singing in the oak trees, the distant hum of maintenance equipment, the whisper of morning breezes through perfectly manicured landscapes, become unnaturally prominent. Richard stares at the black card as if it might transform into something comprehensible if he focuses hard enough. Marcus finally reaches them, his security radio crackling with urgent activity as word spreads through the staff communication network like wildfire through dry grass. Mim Sterling, he says with formal precision, his earlier confusion replaced by professional clarity and deep embarrassment. I sincerely apologize for not recognizing you immediately. The casual attire threw me off. I'm accustomed to seeing you in business suits during board meetings. Victoria raises a graceful hand to halt his apology. You have absolutely nothing to apologize for, Marcus. You've conducted yourself professionally throughout this entire situation. The issue here isn't recognition. It's the assumptions people make based on appearance and their own internal biases. She turns to address the crowd, which has swelled to include virtually every member present at the club that morning. The gathering now represents a cross-section of the city's most influential citizens, business leaders, politicians, socialites, and civic figures, whose opinions and social connections extend far beyond Meadowbrook's boundaries. Ladies and gentlemen, she begins with the natural authority of someone accustomed to commanding boardrooms and addressing shareholders. I own this facility. I also own and operate Pebble Ridge Resort in Aspen, Colorado, Ocean View Links on Hilton Head Island, South Carolina, Cherokee Hills Country Club in Atlanta, Georgia, and 20 other premier golf properties across the United States. Each revelation lands like a carefully placed hammer blow, reshaping the entire context of everything the crowd has witnessed over the past hour. The phones that had been recording casual entertainment are now documenting what they realize will become a viral sensation, and potentially career-ending footage for anyone who appeared to support Richard's behavior. Sterling Golf Enterprises, she continues with clinical precision, employs over 2,000 people across our properties and generates annual revenues exceeding $400 million. We host professional tournaments, corporate retreats, and social events for some of the most prominent figures in American business and politics. Richard appears to be experiencing some form of shock so profound that several people in the crowd look genuinely concerned for his physical well-being. His mouth opens and closes soundlessly, like a fish removed from water, and his usual commanding presence has evaporated completely. "But you look like," he starts to say, then catches himself as his brain finally begins processing the full implications of his situation. "I look like what, Mr. Whitmore?" Victoria asks with dangerous calm, her voice carrying the authority of someone who has negotiated billion-dollar acquisitions and faced down hostile boardrooms. "Please, enlighten everyone here. Share your complete thoughts about my appearance and what assumptions you drew from it." The question hangs in the air like a sword suspended by a thread. Richard understands that any answer he gives will only deepen his predicament, but his silence is equally damning in its implications. The crowd watches with the fascinated horror of people witnessing a public execution, knowing they're seeing someone's entire social standing collapse in real time. Davidson attempts a desperate intervention. "Miss Sterling, I'm absolutely certain this is all just an unfortunate misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" Victoria's eyebrows arched with elegant skepticism. "Is requesting that someone clean your shoes typically considered standard etiquette at Meadowbrook, Mr. Davidson? Because if so, we need to have a serious discussion about our membership policies and staff training procedures." Her words carry the unmistakable tone of an executive identifying operational failures that will require immediate correction. Davidson's face pales further as he realizes his attempt to minimize the situation may have inadvertently implicated the club's management in supporting discriminatory behavior. Thompson, the distinguished older member who had attempted earlier to defuse the situation, steps forward with obvious relief at finally having permission to speak his conscience. "Ms. Sterling, on behalf of those members who tried to intervene, I want to express our sincere apologies for what you've endured this morning." Victoria acknowledges him with a slight nod that somehow manages to convey both appreciation and authority. "Mr. Thompson, I notice your attempts to restore civility to this situation. That speaks very well of your character and your understanding of proper behavior. But this incident isn't about the membership as a whole. It's about individual choices and their inevitable consequences." She looks directly at Richard, whose appearance has taken on the gray pallor of someone realizing that his entire world is about to change irrevocably. "Mr. Whitmore, You wanted to teach me about knowing my place in the world. I think it's time you learned something about yours." Victoria removes her smartphone from her pocket with the deliberate precision of a surgeon selecting a scalpel for a critical operation. The device seems to transform in her hands from a casual communication tool into an instrument of corporate authority, its black surface reflecting the morning light like polished obsidian. "I'm accessing your membership account, Mr. Whitmore," she says with conversational calm while her fingers move across the screen with practiced efficiency. "Our system shows outstanding balances totaling $18,473 across 6 months of unpaid fees and charges." Each word falls like a precisely placed blow, and Richard's face cycles through a spectrum of colors as the full implications begin penetrating his shock-cloud consciousness. The crowd leans closer, drawn by the magnetic pull of watching someone's carefully constructed facade crumble in real time. "Those are just temporary cash flow issues," Richard stammers, his voice lacking its earlier authority and carrying the desperate edge of someone watching their world collapse. "I can have the money transferred within hours. Today, even." "From which account?" Victoria asks with genuine curiosity, tilting her head like a scientist examining an interesting specimen. "Because Sterling Gulf Enterprises maintains comprehensive business intelligence profiles on all premium members for risk management purposes. Your real estate development company, Whitmore Properties, has been struggling significantly since the market downturn, hasn't it?" With a glance at the precision of her knowledge hits like a surgical strike, revealing depths of corporate surveillance that most members never suspected existed. Several people in the crowd shift uncomfortably as they realize their own financial situations might be similarly transparent to the club's ownership. "How could you possibly know?" Richard begins, but Victoria continues with relentless professional thoroughness. "I know because due diligence and risk assessment are fundamental components of how I've built a $400 million enterprise, Mr. Whitmore. I know that your primary construction loan for the Harbor Point development was called in by First National Bank last month. When you missed 3 consecutive payments." Richard's knees appear to buckle slightly, and Thompson moves closer as if preparing to catch him should he fall. The mathematical precision of Victoria's revelations suggests access to financial information that goes far beyond casual background checking. "I know that 3 of your major investors, the Henderson Group, Coastal Development Partners, and Mountain View Capital, withdrew their funding commitments after the Harbor Point project stalled due to environmental compliance issues and cost overruns that exceeded initial estimates by over 40%. Each fact strips away another layer of Richard's carefully maintained public image. The man who had commanded the parking area with such absolute confidence now appears diminished, shrinking visibly before the crowd's eyes, as his professional failures are catalogued with clinical detachment. Furthermore, Victoria continues with devastating thoroughness. "I know that you've been using your Meadowbrook membership as unauthorized collateral for personal loans from 3 different financial institutions, which violates Section 12 of our membership agreement and constitutes grounds for immediate termination, regardless of payment status." The crowd murmurs with shocked recognition that they're witnessing not just personal humiliation, but complete professional destruction. Several members begin discreetly moving away from Richard, as if financial failure might be contagious through proximity. "You can't do this to me," Richard says, but his voice carries no conviction, only the hollow desperation of someone whose options have been systematically eliminated. "I have connections, influential friends who—" "Where, exactly?" Victoria interrupts with apparent interest. "At Sterling Gulf Enterprises? I would genuinely love to meet these influential friends, who might intercede on your behalf with my company." Her tone suggests she's asking about fictional characters, and Richard's silence confirms that his supposed network of powerful allies exists primarily in his imagination, or has already abandoned him as his financial situation deteriorated. Davidson steps forward with obvious reluctance. recognizing that his professional survival requires decisive action. "Mr. Whitmore, I'm going to need you to surrender your membership card, key fob, and any club property in your possession immediately." The physical act of removing the gold membership card from his wallet seems to age Richard a decade in seconds. His hands shake uncontrollably as he places the items in Davidson's outstretched palm, and the crowd watches with the morbid fascination of people observing a public execution. 15 years, Richard whispers, his voice barely audible above the morning breeze. I've been a member of this club for 15 years. This is my life, my social circle, my business network. And in those 15 years, Victoria responds with quiet intensity. How many service employees have you treated exactly the way you treated me this morning? How many people have you humiliated for the entertainment of your friends? The question hangs unanswered because everyone present, including Richard himself, can imagine the likely response. The silence stretches uncomfortably as people consider their own behavior toward staff members over the years. Emily, who had tried so desperately to prevent this disaster from the beginning, looks at Richard with a mixture of pity and disgust. Her earlier attempts to protect him now seem prophetic rather than insubordinate. Thompson speaks into the oppressive silence with gentle finality. "Richard, it's time for you to leave." The dismissal is delivered with kindness, but its meaning is unmistakable. Other members nod in agreement, their earlier tolerance for his behavior transformed into embarrassment at having been associated with his conduct. The social dynamics that had protected Richard's authority throughout his membership now work against him with equal force. Victoria addresses the crowd one final time before Richard's departure. "I want everyone here to understand clearly that what happened this morning wasn't about me personally or my position in the company hierarchy. This was about fundamental assumptions, unconscious prejudice, and the abuse of perceived social power." She pauses to let her words sink in before continuing. "Mr. Whitmore made his choices based on how I looked, rather than who I am as a person. That reveals something profound about character. His character, specifically." Richard makes one final, desperate attempt to salvage something from the wreckage of his social standing. "If I had known who you were." "Exactly," Victoria cuts him off with surgical precision. "If you had known, which means you believe it's perfectly acceptable to treat people poorly as long as they lack the power to retaliate effectively. That's not character, Mr. Whitmore. That's cowardice masquerading as authority." Marcus appears at Richard's elbow with professional courtesy but unmistakable firmness. "Sir, I'll escort you to your vehicle and off the property." As Richard walks toward his BMW with Marcus beside him, his expensive shoes clicking on the asphalt with diminished authority, several phones continue recording his exit. The man who had arrived that morning as a prominent club member leaves as a cautionary tale about hubris and prejudice, his transformation complete and irreversible. Victoria watches his departure with no visible satisfaction, displaying only the quiet confidence of someone who has used power appropriately and proportionally to address injustice, without descending to cruelty or revenge. After Richard's BMW disappears beyond the ornate iron gates that guard Meadowbrook's entrance, Victoria retrieves her own car keys, the Tesla fob that initiated this extraordinary chain of events, what now feels like hours ago. She holds them up with a gentle smile that carries no trace of vindictiveness or triumph, only the quiet irony of someone who has witnessed human nature reveal itself in all its complexity. "I suppose now I can park my own car," she observes with understated humor, and the tension that has gripped the crowd for the past hour finally begins to dissipate, with scattered nervous laughter that grows more genuine as people process what they've witnessed. The sound seems to restore some semblance of normalcy to the morning, though everyone present understands they've participated in something that will fundamentally reshape their understanding of power dynamics, social assumptions, and the consequences of prejudicial behavior. Victoria addresses the crowd, which now includes virtually every member present at the club, along with staff members who have emerged from various departments, drawn by word of the unprecedented events unfolding in the VIP parking area. I want to thank all of you for being here this morning, not because what happened served my interests, but because it provided a valuable illustration of assumptions we all make about others based on appearance, clothing, and social context. Her words carry the weight of someone accustomed to delivering important messages to influential audiences, but also the warmth of someone genuinely committed to positive change rather than mere retribution. Emily approaches hesitantly, her earlier frustration now transformed into professional respect mixed with personal admiration. Ms. Sterling, I should have intervened more forcefully when I realized what was happening. I failed to protect you from that treatment. Victoria's response demonstrates the leadership qualities that built her business empire. You acted with integrity within the constraints of your position, Emily. That took courage, especially when challenging a senior member meant risking your employment. The real issue isn't individual bravery, it's systemic change that protects people from having to choose between doing right and protecting their livelihoods. Marcus joins their conversation, his earlier confusion now replaced by professional clarity and obvious respect. Miss Sterling, I should have recognized you immediately. I've worked security for several events where you were present, but why should recognition matter? Victoria interrupts gently. Every person who walks through those gates deserves basic human respect, regardless of their name, position, or bank account balance. The problem isn't that you failed to recognize me. It's that recognition shouldn't be necessary for decent treatment. Thompson, the distinguished older member whose earlier intervention attempts had been thwarted by Richard's aggression, steps forward with evident relief at finally being able to express his views freely. You're absolutely right, Miss Sterling. This morning has forced me to examine my own behavior and assumptions more carefully than I have in years. That's all any of us can do, Victoria responds with genuine warmth. Learn from our experiences and commit to being better than we were yesterday. This situation isn't about punishment or revenge. It's about growth, understanding, and creating positive change. She looks toward the cameras that are still recording, knowing that this footage will reach audiences far beyond Meadowbrook's membership and potentially influence conversations about respect, dignity, and social justice across multiple communities. For those who will see this story shared later, I hope it encourages self-reflection about times when you may have judged others based on assumptions rather than actual knowledge. We've all done it at some point. Made snap decisions about people based on their appearance, their job, their clothing, or their race. Her voice carries both authority and accessibility, making complex social issues feel manageable and actionable rather than overwhelming. The question isn't whether we've made mistakes in the past, but whether we're willing to acknowledge those mistakes and commit to better behavior going forward. Davidson approaches with obvious relief that the crisis appears to be resolving constructively rather than destructively. Ms. Sterling, how would you like the club to address this situation moving forward? What changes would you like to see implemented? Victoria's response demonstrates the strategic thinking that drives successful organizations. Schedule comprehensive diversity and inclusion training for all staff members within the next 2 weeks, Davidson. Not because anyone behaved inappropriately today. Emily and Marcus conducted themselves professionally throughout, but because we can always improve how we serve everyone who comes here. She begins walking toward the clubhouse entrance, her earlier casual attire now clearly revealed as the confident choice of someone who doesn't require external symbols to project authority or command respect. I have work to do, she says simply. We need to ensure that Meadowbrook truly welcomes everyone who appreciates golf, regardless of their background, appearance, or social status. That's not just good ethics, It's good business. Emily falls into step beside her with newfound confidence. Miss Sterling, would you like me to arrange lunch in the private dining room? I could coordinate with the kitchen staff. That sounds wonderful, Emily. And please, call me Victoria. We're going to be working together to implement some positive changes around here, and I prefer a collaborative approach to management. As they disappear through the mahogany doors of the clubhouse, the crowd slowly begins to disperse, but their conversations continue with unusual intensity and introspection. Everyone present recognizes they've witnessed something significant. A moment when power was used not for revenge, but for education and the promise of positive transformation. The morning sun climbs higher over Meadowbrook's pristine grounds, illuminating a place that will never quite be the same again, where assumptions have been challenged and a new standard of respect and dignity has been established through the quiet strength of someone who understood that true power lies not in humiliating others, but in lifting them up. What transpired at Meadowbrook Country Club that extraordinary morning spread across social media platforms with the velocity and force of a digital wildfire, transcending geographical boundaries and social demographics with unprecedented speed. The multiple camera angles captured by numerous club members created a comprehensive documentation that left no room for alternative interpretations or damage control spin. Within 12 hours, the hashtags Respect for All and Sterling Standard were trending not just nationally, but internationally, as viewers around the world connected with the universal themes of dignity, justice, and the appropriate use of power. The video footage garnered over 5 million views in the first 24 hours, but its real impact extended far beyond simple metrics into conversations happening in boardrooms, classrooms, dinner tables, and community centers across the globe. Victoria Sterling's response to Richard Whitmore's behavior became an instant case study in crisis management programs at prestigious business schools, while corporate diversity and inclusion departments used the footage to illustrate both the persistence of unconscious bias and the power of principled leadership in addressing discrimination when it occurs. The incident sparked thousands of personal stories shared across social platforms as people from every background began discussing their own experiences with prejudice, assumption, and the courage required to stand up for others when witnessing injustice. My Meadowbrook moment became a rallying cry for individuals sharing times they had been judged unfairly or had witnessed others being treated poorly based on appearance rather than character. Richard Whitmore's story, meanwhile, became a cautionary tale that resonated throughout professional and social communities, serving as a stark reminder that in our interconnected world, character matters more than privilege, and that respect should never be contingent upon social status or perceived power dynamics. For Victoria Sterling personally, the incident reinforced her commitment to using her business success as a platform for positive social change. Sterling Golf Enterprises announced new policies across all 24 properties, ensuring that every guest and employee would be treated with dignity regardless of their appearance, background, or perceived social status. But perhaps the most significant impact occurred in the thousands of individual moments when people chose differently because they remembered Victoria's story, when they decided to speak up instead of staying silent, when they chose to judge others by their actions rather than their appearance, when they used their own influence, however small, to create positive change rather than maintain harmful status quo. The questions Victoria's experience raises extend far beyond any single golf club, to every workplace, every social interaction, every moment when we choose how to treat the people around us. When you witness unfairness or discrimination, will you be the person who intervenes or the one who remains silent? When you encounter someone new, will you make assumptions based on their appearance, or will you offer them the basic respect that every human being deserves? Share this story if you believe dignity and respect should be universal human rights. Comment about your own experiences with bias, either as a target or a witness. Most importantly, Commit to being part of the solution by examining your own assumptions and using whatever influence you possess to create positive change. Because sometimes the most powerful person in any situation isn't the one with the loudest voice, the most expensive clothes, or the highest social status. It's the one with the strongest character and the courage to use their influence for justice rather than personal advantage. The choice of what kind of person you want to be starts with your very next interaction. What will your Meadowbrook moment reveal about your character? How will you choose to use whatever power you possess? The world is watching, and change begins with each of us deciding to be better than we were yesterday.